Welcome to Let's Talk Democracy. I'm Tina Johnson, your host. Join me as we talk to the people on the front lines, the change makers and activists who are building a stronger, healthier democracy for all of us. Whether you're looking for expert advice, a new perspective, or just a little inspiration, this is where you'll find it. In today's episode, When Silence Becomes Complicity, I will be sharing my thoughts on the rise of the far right in the political arena across Europe and the United States. And without question, this is something that should cause great alarm. But what should cause even greater alarm is the number of people who are openly and more disturbingly, quietly support these ideologies. Those who nod in silent agreement, those who say nothing at all, and those who believe, well, it's not that bad. Today we ask, what's fueling this movement? Who are its real supporters? And how do we confront a political shift that thrives in silence and shadows as much as it does in rallies and headlines? Let's get into it. I've been thinking a lot about my recent conversation with Zolal Habibi, where we discussed the Iranian resistance and their ongoing courageous struggle for democracy over the past 60 years. It made me reflect on a deeper question. Do we really understand what democratic values and principles mean? In light of the struggle of so many other countries who want to have a democratic system of governance, and how that struggle oftentimes doesn't materialize for a number of factors. Do we really understand from the perspective of those of us who do live in democratic societies what those values and principles actually mean? Democracy isn't just a form of government. It's really a radical idea that the people have the right to shape how they are governed, that they have the freedom to speak, to vote, to dissent, to run for office, to hold others accountable within that governing structure, to live without fear of persecution by monarchs, dictators, or the powerful few because they don't agree with their rules or their way of wanting the society to work. But here's what we forget. When the rights of any group, for any reason, are restricted, that it actually weakens the rights of all of us. When we allow injustice to happen over there, we're saying that we're okay if it happens over here. When we ignore discrimination because it doesn't affect us personally, we are not protecting democracy. We are eroding it. Every democracy has evolved in its own unique way. No two democracies are the same. But across the board, the rights and privileges we now defend in our democratic societies were not freely given to everyone. They had to be fought for. A prime example of this fight and struggle, and we've heard it throughout many of the episodes on this podcast, took place in the U.S., the Civil Rights Movement. It was one of the pivotal fights, the monumental fight for American inclusivity, American fairness, American equity, a push towards equality under the Constitution, under the law of the United States, a movement that forced the nation to reckon with its contradictions and move the needle toward a fuller, more inclusive democracy. And it's an ongoing struggle, right? It's not completed, but that is one of those bright lights in the history of American democracy that is often pointed to. But let's fast forward to where we are today and to a disturbing truth. What we're seeing now isn't about one country or one party. It's a pattern playing out across the globe. If we look at the United States, the MAGA movement didn't fade after 2020. It just intensified. It infiltrated school boards, local governments, and online echo chambers that fuel conspiracy thinking and extremism. Political violence, increasingly normalized. Accountability, rare, and often mocked. It is more likely to see politicians mocking their opposition party than trying to find ways in which they can discuss how to govern together and to create access to a governance structure that actually fulfills the needs of the majority of the citizenry. But this isn't just an American story. If we look across Europe, the far right is rising. In Germany, you have Alternative für Deutschland, which is now a serious political contender. In France, Marie Le Pen's party isn't just a fringe voice any longer, it's a major player. In Austria, in Spain, and yes, even in Sweden, far-right parties are gaining ground. Sweden has long been viewed as the global standard of progressive politics. But now, the Sweden Democrats, a party with neo-Nazi roots, is helping to shape government policy. Norway, a peaceful nation, right? But the Progressive Party, with its anti-immigration stance, on September 8th of this year, nearly doubled its share of the vote from 2021, making it the second largest party nationwide after the Labour Party. The rise wasn't a fluke. It reflected growing frustration over immigration, cost of living, and energy policies. And it signals something deeper, that far-right populism is resonating even in the world's most stable democracies. I think it's important to note that in the largest cities of Norway, they didn't vote for this populist agenda. I think that that's also a very important trend of where populism is growing. It's usually in the communities and places and spaces where people are not part of the centralized resources that are offered within a democratic society. We concentrate a lot of our resources where most of the people are. And that leads people feeling alienated. So from the United States to Western Europe to peaceful Nordic countries and even to fragile democracies navigating post-colonial or post-authoritarian transitions, we have what many would call the Overton Window. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Overton Window, this describes the range of ideas and arguments that are considered politically acceptable at any given time. And make no mistake, the far right has been pushing that window wider, normalizing ideas that once lived on the fringes, turning conspiracy into campaign strategy, turning scapegoating into national policy. We should be clear. This is not a series of isolated events. The rise of the far right is not a local anomaly. It is a coordinated global shift. And we need to start treating it that way, with urgency, with clarity, and with a collective refusal to stay silent while democracy is slowly hollowed out from within. So the question has to be asked, why now? Why are people now turning to far-right ideologies that just a decade ago would have seemed extreme? Part of the answer is psychological. And we've heard this before. There's a psychology around the way people are behaving and why they're behaving. When people feel uncertain, afraid, or left behind, they look for clarity, simplicity, belonging. And the far right delivers that in plain language, with strong emotion, and with one central message. You are not the problem. They are. They offer a scapegoat, a villain, a sense of righteous victimhood. And let's be clear, this isn't just reaching radical extremists. It's reaching ordinary people, people who feel alienated, disconnected, ignored by the political mainstream. They may not wear red hats or wave far-right flags, but they share the posts, they vote, and they nod quietly when someone says something dangerous, then look away. It's not always shouted. Most of the time, it's whispered. And that brings us to what should truly alarm us, the silence. We often imagine extremism as loud, violent, obvious, but more often it rises through quiet approval, through phrases like, I don't agree with everything they say, but they tell it like it is. I'm not a racist, but I'm just concerned about all this immigration. I stay out of politics. These aren't fringe comments. These are things we hear at work, at family dinners, in PTA meetings. And every time we don't push back, every time we stay silent to keep the peace, we give space for dangerous ideologies to grow. I mean, let's face it, silence is not neutral. It's participation. And history, especially the history of the 20th century, tells us where that leads. Now, I think it's important that we take a look at the other side. Why are the center and left, the supposed defenders of democracy, losing ground? One word: emotion. Blair Talmadge and I talked a lot about this in the last episode of the podcast. The far right speaks in emotion, identity, simplicity. Progressives often speak in policy, in compromise, and bullet points. But people aren't just voting with their minds, they're voting with their guts. And when people feel afraid, confused, or alone, emotions win. And since making people feel afraid, confused, or alone is a strategy that is being used by the far right, they're able to then swoop in with this emotion for the win, but it also provides an opportunity for others' voices to come in and to help them feel less afraid, less confused, and less alone. But the other problem that we have in combating this is that we fear offense. We fear offending. Too many moderates stay quiet, hoping not to stir conflict. But conflict is already here. And democracy doesn't survive through politeness. It survives through courage. We can't out-policy authoritarianism. We have to out-believe it with stronger values, louder voices, and deeper conviction. Not necessarily combating every extreme conspiracy theory that we hear. We're not going to change hearts and minds. We're not going to change people by trying to convince them what they believe is wrong or somehow extremely flawed. That's not helpful. So the question is, well, what do we do? How do we do it? One of the first things we can do is name it. When we see it, even if it's subtle, far-right ideology doesn't always wear a swastika. It often shows up as concern about immigration, traditional values, or just asking questions. Call it what it is: xenophobia, white nationalism, authoritarianism, even when it's dressed in polite language. This helps shift the Overton window back toward democratic norms. What you're saying echoes language used by far-right groups. Is that your intention? Ask, reflect, interrupt the comfort. We have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Number 2, speak up. especially in everyday spaces. It's one thing to post online, it's another thing to speak up. In family conversations, at the office, in community meetings, at school boards, or religious gatherings. I have a family member who voted for Trump. I am always responding to his posts on social media and providing alternatives to information input for him so that he can at least be aware of the other narrative that's out there rather than just relying on the narrative that he's so focused on within his community. And I love him. So it's done with love. It's done because I really feel an obligation to this family member for the wellness of our entire family to engage. So I push against, and we should be pushing against, the narrative that politics is taboo in polite company. If we only speak up in activist spaces, we're preaching to the choir. Number 3, normalize political literacy. The far right thrives in spaces where people don't understand how power works. We need to make civic education, media literacy, and historical context part of everyday conversations. Share books, podcasts, or films that expose authoritarian movements. Talk about voting systems, local governance, propaganda. Teach the sign of domestic backsliding. This podcast might be of interest in sharing because we have done several episodes on lots of these different topics. Number 4, reach the movable middle. Yes, there is a middle that can be moved. Not everyone who flirts with the far right ideas is fully radicalized. Some are scared, some feel left behind. So rather than shame them, engage them. Ask questions like, what makes you feel that way? What do you think the alternative should look like? Who benefits from us being divided like this? So this change doesn't come from debates. It comes from relationships and curiosity. And it can be frustrating. As much as I love this family member that I share information with, I get frustrated. And then I have to remind myself as my blood pressure is boiling and my emotions are getting the best of me, that I'm not trying to debate as much as I'm trying to share through the relationship. And being curious allows them to relax a bit and to hear in a different way. That's been my experience. Number 5, organize, not just react. Silence fills the space where proactive organizing is missing. We need more than opposition. We need vision, community, and long-term strategy. That looks like running for office, even at the school board level, or engaging in political communities or environments, supporting independent media, building cross-racial, cross-class alliances, funding the boring but essential stuff, voter registration, civic infrastructure, legal defense funds, or any social organization that is working towards stabilizing and building stronger democratic values and principles. 6, make it personal. When people understand how their own rights and dignity are tied to the rights of others, they're more likely to speak up. Tell stories, use personal stakes, talk about how silence allowed past atrocities and how we can stop that cycle now. Number 7, build a culture where courage is contagious. People stay silent because they fear being alone. So show them they're not. If you speak up, you give others permission to do the same. You can start small. Be consistent. Let courage ripple. To bring the silence into the light, we don't just need louder voices, we need braver ones. Voices willing to risk comfort for truth, connection for clarity, and silence for something far and silence for something far more powerful: a living, breathing democracy. The unspoken shift is this: extremism does not just rise in violence. It rises in shrugs, in "I don't want to get into it," in "it's just politics." But politics is personal. Politics is people. And if we stay silent, we become part of the story we're trying to prevent. So let me ask you, what are you tolerating that should not be tolerated? What are you letting slide because it's easier to say nothing? Democracy doesn't die in one moment. It dies in millions of small moments when people stay silent. Don't be one of them. In today's episode, we confronted the most urgent political shifts of our time: the global rise of far-right ideologies, not just in headlines and elections, but in the hearts and minds of everyday people. Globally, far-right movements are gaining traction. But it's not only the loud supporters we should fear, it's the quiet ones, those who agree in silence, vote without explanation, and normalize dangerous ideas through inaction. We explored how emotional insecurity, cultural shifts, and political disillusionment have created fertile ground for extremist narratives. I want to challenge listeners to recognize the real threat to democracy isn't always violent or obvious. It's often subtle, comfortable, and whispered in spaces where no one pushes back. In this episode, we asked, why is the far right growing? And why now? What role does silence play in its spread? Why is the Democratic Center failing to respond effectively? And most importantly, what can each of us do starting today? This episode is a call to action for anyone who believes democracy is guaranteed and who understands that silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. If this episode resonated with you, I hope you'll share it. Leave a review, subscribe. You can follow us on Instagram at Pattern Change Lab. And more importantly, start a conversation, because silence is exactly what the far right is counting on. Talk to you next time.